Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here with us today. My name is Lexi Hall. I'm a clinical dietitian, and I get the pleasure of working with this gal over here, Samantha Chacon, with Max Love. And so today we're going to run you through our nutrigenomics, detoxification, and culinary medicine. So we've got a lot to share with you. And Samantha is our incredible all things media person, and she's going to be moderating the Q&A box. So if you've got any questions at all, please enter them in there. The presentation itself is going to last right around an hour, maybe an hour and 5 minutes with some extra requests that we've had. And then that'll be followed by a 25-minute Q&A session. So we'll get to all those questions as we go. And then if there's any burning questions, Samantha will give me a heads up and we'll try to clarify and answer some as we go too. And then Samantha, you are also going to be putting in some recipe type information
Yeah, so
for everybody.
I have some recipes that Lexi will reference in her presentation, and I'll share that with you guys in the chat. And what would be helpful if you have any questions to just put that in the Q&A part so that I can keep track of them versus the chat. That would be helpful, but I will be sharing resources, links, ideas as Lexi goes on for you guys to save as we go through.
And just to let everybody know, Samantha is a fantastic resource for everything you could possibly ask for. So she's waiting and ready and loves to help.
Yeah,
Thank
always
you,
here.
Samantha. All right, so I am going to share my screen and start the presentation here. And so file, play from beginning, play from start. All right. So this is our talking points for today. So we're going to be discussing nutrition basics. We're going to talk a lot about some terms that are necessary to know for nutrigenomics basics. So we're going to talk about what it is, first of all, and then we're going to go into what a SNP or genetic variance is. We're going to go into epigenetics and then a couple other terms that are really important. Once we're through with the basics of that, we're going to really delve into a specific pathway within the body called detoxification and just give some examples of some genetic variances that can occur with that. And then we're going to talk about what foods can really help if you have these genetic variances. But it's all good and fine to know what it is that you can eat to solve a particular problem with genetics, but it's another thing entirely to get kids to eat them. And so we're going to delve into a lot of culinary medicine today. And then I also have a treat for those who have never seen one of Chef Andrew's Fierce Foods classes before. We have a quick 7-minute video that gives a great description of salad dressings actually today. So we'll go ahead and get started right off the bat with the science of genes and nutrigenomics. And Sam, if you'll notify me if anybody has a problem with sound or a problem with seeing my screens and so that I don't, keep talking if somebody has a problem. So we're going to start off right off the bat talking about what nutrigenomics is, and then we are going to talk about some just basic definitions for DNA, genes, chromosomes. We're going to talk about GWAS, which is genetic-wide association studies, as well as polygenic risk scores. And then we're going to talk about SNPs, what they are, alleles, what they are, and epigenetics. So we're going to fly through some of those sections. Be sure to write any questions at all in the Q&A, and we'll get to those. Samantha found this quote. This quote was printed in the scientific journal Nature, and it just is an excellent statement of what nutrigenomics is. And so basically, nutrigenomics is the study of the effects of food and the parts of food on how genes express themselves. It also focuses on the interaction between nutrients and other bioactives. So those could be bioactives, special nutrients in food that aren't actually caloric, not actually carbohydrate, protein, or fat, but they still have a special part to them that makes a change in the way genes express themselves. So that is a great, excellent description right there of nutrigenomics written in Nature magazine. So Jill's delving straight into it. A gene is the part on the body, the part within the cell that is responsible for building you. And so it's basically a set of instructions that builds proteins. And those proteins that are in the body can be something like hormones. So, say, for example, cortisol is a hormone, and that is something that is built within your body with the instructions that are on a gene. And so just like the English alphabet is 26 letters, and you can write an instruction manual with those 26 letters, the genes contain just 4 letters, and those are called nucleotides, and they're C, G, T, and A. And there can be billions of those pairs of those 2 letters that create the DNA, that create the instruction manual for how to build something. And a complete set of genes on an organ is called a genome. And so all of these genes are organized in chromosomes. And you've all seen that from biology, where you have those 23 pairs of chromosomes. You get one from each parent. So you have a total of 46. And these genes are organized on there. There can be up to 2,000 genes on one chromosome. You get half from mom, half from dad. So Samantha actually created this awesome graphic, and it just depicts the flow of information going forward. So the chromosome, and then this blue line would be the gene. And that from there, you pull out the DNA, all those nucleotides in base pairs. And from there, that gives all the instructions on how to build an amino acid, which is a building block of a protein. And then you actually build the protein. One great example of it is hemoglobin. And so proteins are cells, and so it can build a red blood cell, it can build a white blood cell, all of that. The 4 letters have names, and so they are called nucleotides. C stands for cytosine, thymine, guanine, adenine. And there is this awesome video here, if you are more of an audio-visual learner, that you'll see. Sorry about that. Switch to the last slide. That you can click on in the slides when they're posted that can depict more. So what is a SNP? A SNP, it's an acronym, and that stands for a description called a single nucleotide polymorphism. And if you break that down and divide up what it's saying that the nucleotide has a single change to it. So like, for example, it was a set of instructions that contained a C, and that C got changed to a T. So it's a single change in the nucleotide level, and that happens in at least 1% of the population before it can be considered a SNP. And so polymorphisms, poly stands for many, and morphism stands for change. So single nucleotide polymorphism is the abbreviation that makes up SNP, and it just means it's a genetic variance. So researchers have discovered more than a million different possible SNPs that are out there. And it doesn't always have to be a negative. It could be something like brown eyes, blue eyes, or it could be something like blood type, but it could also be serious disease as well. It could impact the individual's response to drugs. And it can also help researchers figure out which toxins might be better, more easily modified by a person, or which a person might have trouble with. And so there's lots of different things that they can figure out with these studies when they identify a SNP, and seeing that it's present in more than 1% of the population, they can make references like that. The next description there is what is an allele. An allele means is that you get one copy from mom, one copy from dad. So if you get one copy from dad that has the genetic variance, but the copy from mom doesn't have the genetic variance, that would be considered what's called heterozygous or different. You could also have a situation where you get 2 copies of the same genetic variance. And going back to that example of blue eyes, brown eyes, blue eyes is considered recessive and brown eyes is considered dominant. So if you get one copy of a brown eye and one copy of a blue eye, it's the brown eye that's going to express itself because that's dominant. You need 2 copies of that blue eye in order to have blue eyes. And so that's one example here. Another one is blood type, whether or not you get one copy from mom, one copy from dad. It's interesting to see how SNPs get their names. And so I thought you guys would think that's interesting as well. And so genes are written with letter symbols. So it's an acronym basically that stands for the name of the protein that the genes create. So it's the genes is that instruction manual creating a protein. And the protein could be something like an enzyme, a hormone, a cell. In this example, they've named it MTHFR. That's a common one that a lot of people know about. It stands for methyl tetrahydrate folate reductase. And so you can see why it's helpful to have some of these having these short letter abbreviations. But the purpose of this particular enzyme is to make B vitamins ready, specifically folate and B12. And that means ready to do their jobs. And so folate is really important inside the brain for brain cells. And it's also really important inside the bone marrow in order to make new blood cells. And so it's also important in neurotransmitters. The purpose of that enzyme is to make it ready. This particular SNP, it is on the section 677 on the chromosome. So that's where the gene's location is on the chromosome. And in this particular genetic change, it changed its nucleotide from a C to a T. And that's where the change happened. This particular type is called a missense. And so there are different other genes that also, there's probably 4 MTHFRs that I know about that all are in different locations and have different letter changes, but this is an example of one of them. You'll see it commonly expressed in a lot of the literature out there as a 5 letter acronym, but you'll also see it with an RS number. If you ever go to SNPedia, which is like Wikipedia, but only for SNPs, you'll see a lot of them referred to by the RS number. And a lot of websites will refer to them both ways. An RS number is a public archive for genetic variations, and it's hosted by the National Center for Biotechnology Information. You can look it up that way. But these individual sequences are referred to by their reference SNP number. It's a cluster ID number. So a genome-wide association study is where scientists get together and they figure out how many people have the same SNPs that express itself in specific disease states. So a common one that a lot of people might know would be, say, BRCA gene. If you have BRCA gene as a woman, it has the higher incidence of breast cancer associated with it. But they also use these genome-wide association studies as a tool to figure out what treatment strategy might work better with different people. And it also allows for precision medication, which is really incredibly helpful and a huge advance that has happened in the last 10 years. Polygenic risk scores is also something that's really important to take into consideration when you're talking about genetic SNPs. Because, like we just talked about with the MTHFR, there is more than one genetic SNP that affects how the body processes both folate and B12 and the whole process of methylation. And the polygenic risk scores is what scientists use where they look at all of the different SNPs that affect the body's ability to perform an action, and they actually assign them a numerical significance. And so they gather them all together in a system and say you have all of these genes. Say, for example, you had 10 genes that are associated with folate, and 5 of them have a genetic SNP. It's going to carry more weight and more signify a problem than if you only had one genetic SNP in that particular area. So go back here, there we go. So researchers are creating the algorithm. We're assessing risk based on the number of genetic variances within the same body system, and that helps us figure out how impactful that group of that polygenic risk score is going to be. So that leads us to epigenetics. And so with SNPs, you're actually changing DNA. You're changing the genetic nucleotides, and you're changing the way that instruction manual is written. With epigenetics, you're more focusing on the environment that the genes are bathed in. And the example of the queen bee gives a really nice example of how that happens. So a queen bee is genetically identical to a worker bee. The only difference is that queen bees are fed a substance called royal jelly. And this protein-rich substance, if the queens feed on it, they develop ovaries and they make babies. And they're bigger, larger, and they have a specific role to play that the worker bees don't. And what researchers found out is that the royal jelly contains a bioactive, just like we were talking before, that silences a key gene called DNME3. That stands for DNA methyltransferase. And when that gene is turned on, queen bees are epigenetically silenced. But when it's turned off, the queen forms the ovaries, she forms the babies, and then that makes her a queen. And so this bioactive silences that particular gene. So again, it doesn't change the letter coding on that, but it changes the expression of it. There is an excellent article if you want to read more about the queen bee that's referenced at the bottom of this slide. So we're done with our genetics section. Our basics are that we've got 23 chromosomes, one from each parent, total of 46. We've got over 20,000 genes arranged on these chromosomes. We have the potential for 1.5 million SNPs on that. The genes contain DNA. The DNA is the instruction manual. It contains the codes, which are the nucleotides for building proteins. SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. They change DNA. They affect genetic expression. And epigenetics is the effect of environment on the gene expression, but it does not alter the DNA. And so if you got any questions on that section, please enter those in the chat box. But we'll move on right now to what our nutrigenomics program at MaxLove is all about. And so we started with this with a pilot program last year. And as Sam said at the beginning, we continue to work on funding for that. What it involves is the kids will go in and they can do it at home, get a cheek swab, and that's sent off to the company that we work with. I really care for 3x4 Nutrigenomics a lot, but there are about 20 different firms out there that do nutrigenomics. And so with 3x4 Nutrigenomics, they create a report that reports on 135 different genetic variances that are modifiable by nutrition. So hence that name, Nutrigenomics. What can we do with nutrition to modify? So you're not going to get on this particular report all the possibilities of genetics for disease that you would go see a geneticist for. For this report, we're just going to report on genetic variances that are modifiable with nutrition. So something we can do something about. They're going to give us polygenic risk scores with this report. So they're going to break down the genetic variances into 36 possible pathways. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that gives you an example of these pathways. And they're going to give us a numerical significance of which ones they think are going to be the most impactful pathways and the ones to pay attention to and get tested for. With this report, you get 3 diet, 3 lifestyle, and 3 supplement recommendations. But I always ask people to exercise caution with this because the supplement suggestions don't know your kid. And so they don't know what disease states your kids might have. They don't know what other possible medications your child might be on or what challenges they might face. And so the supplement that they're suggesting may not be appropriate in your individualized case. So it's always good to personalize and tailor to whatever is going on with the child. That's number one. Number two is the SNPs are not always an on-off thing. Either it works or it doesn't. It's more like a possibility that this could be ineffective. So I always say pair it with lab testing. So if you have a bunch of genetics that say you're not doing well with your folate and B12, test your folate B12. It's easy to do in the blood, and then only supplement if actually necessary. Culinary medicine works all the time. So you can just eat foods that do wonderful things for your body, but supplements come in physiologically high doses that make change. So I'm always telling people to exercise caution with supplements or specialized high quantities of herbs because these things do a bioactive job in the body. But what's great about this entire program is that it can really help us tailor specific information to your child and how they respond to medicine, how they respond to certain foods, and whether or not they could use additional support in any particular area. So this is an example of what 3 pages on this 3x4 Nutrigenomics report looks like. And so there's 38 pages total in the report, but I really center in on these particular pages. The first one is where they report all of the genetic variances that they're reporting on, those 135 that I tell you about. And they use the information, the first column of the information is the 3 or 4 letter acronym that stands for what the gene does, what the gene is building, a protein that does the job. And then in the middle column, they talk about how the single nucleotide change happened. So it went from a C to a T or a G to an A. And then they go into detail about what alleles you actually have. And they do this where they sort it all by color. And so in the dark purple areas, that would be considered the most impactful, all the way down to the bottom areas, which are gray, which have no impact at all. And okay, I keep hitting my mouse too fast there. Sorry about that. So as you can see here in this particular example report, they're listed, these are the ones that are listed as very highly impact. Remember, these are just single SNPs. The other part of the report goes into the pathway. So that's where they get into the polygenic risk score. And they're still using, in this center example here, right here, they're still using the language of color. So those that are in all of these different pathways, there's 36 of them listed here, that are dark purple are more impactful than, say, the ones that are in the yellow. And so let's just look at this body system right here. They're talking about how does your body respond to glucose? How does your body respond to insulin? How about memory and brain health? How about collagen in joints or bone health? They talk a lot about different particular nutrients. So here you would see how your body does with B12, how it does with folate, how about salt or vitamin D. And so it has that section. And then later on, they actually delineate the genes within a specific pathway. So like, for example, on this page right here, they're talking about the cellular pathway. So they're talking about methylation, oxidative stress, detoxification, and inflammation. And they give actually a number 1, 2, 3, and 4 with what they think, statistically speaking, is your most impactful pathway. And then again, they list the genes variances that you have from the dark purple all the way down to the gray color so that you can pick it apart that way. So that's what those reports look like. So from here, I wanted to kind of narrow our focus and jump into one particular pathway and talk about the detoxification system. And again, this is Samantha's gorgeous artwork here, where she came up with this great graphic to really explain this entire pathway for us. And so the body has a great system of getting rid of different toxins in the body. And the big majority of that job falls on the liver. And so the toxins that come into your body can be created from within. So, for example, when you're eating food, your body creates free radicals from that. When you are putting together different hormones like cortisol, fight or flight, you need that to run away from a danger, but you also need to calm down at some point. So that needs to be broken down and gotten rid of. So that would be considered an endogenous toxin. So something that was inside the body was made, and the liver needs to break it down and get rid of it. The second part of that is exogenous, meaning coming from outside the body. And so that would be things like your BPA in water bottles, or your Teflon in pots and pans, or some kind of toxin in the water you drink, or the smog that you know smell when you go down the highway. It could also be household products, hygiene products, pollutants, things like that. The first thing the body does when it is faced with a toxin is that it sequesters it in the liver and it surrounds it with fat. And that fat is meant to cordon it off from the rest of the body so that it doesn't get into the bloodstream and do more damage to other tissues. So it can keep it safe there, and then it can work on it and get it out of the body. So the first thing it does, oh, I'm so sorry I keep doing that. The first thing it does is it puts it in this fat soluble component. And then from there, in phase one detoxification, it moves it into an intermediate stage. So it gets it out of the fat and it's preparing it to get into a water soluble phase. And then once it is in, I have to figure out how to stop that. Once it's in the water soluble phase, it's eliminated from the body via sweat, stool, urine, and breath. So that is a beautiful depiction of how the body eliminates toxins. But it does all these things, phase one and phase two, with the help of a ton of different nutrients. And so if you look at phase one, I'm going to try to touch my mouse without changing the screen here. So phase one, you need a lot of B vitamins to make that happen. You also need glutathione, and you also need something called CYP enzymes. And I'll explain what those are in just a second. And that helps it get out of this fat soluble into this intermediate stage. That intermediate stage is pretty reactive because it's no longer secured and safe in the fat. And you need a lot of antioxidants to help through that process to get it from that quick intermediate stage. You want that process to go quickly, get it to the water and get it out. And so all of the antioxidants are super valuable there. So vitamins A, C, E, selenium, those are all antioxidants, and they're super helpful in getting it out of this stage. And then once it's in phase two, we're back at the need for protein, back at the amino acids in order to help get it the final stage. And there's different processes that happen in that one. One is done with something called glucuronidation and sulfation. All of those processes grab onto it, get it out of that reactive stage, get it into water, and then move it out. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to optimize the elimination. So you want to drink enough water to make sure that you're urinating properly. You want to eat enough fiber to make sure that you're stooling properly. You want to get that deep breathing action going there. So you're not doing short, shallow breaths so that you're eliminating carbon dioxide appropriately. And you want to sweat. A passive sweat in like a sauna or something like that is even more advantageous than a working out sweat. But either way, get your sweat on. It's very, very helpful to detoxification. So thank you again, Sam, for that awesome graphic, because that is beautiful. I wanted to just give a quick reference here on a study, or actually a statement that was put in the Clinical Pharmacology in 1997, talking about how genetic variances definitely do impact our ability to clear toxins for the body. In this particular report, they're talking about variations in cytochrome P450 enzymes. And those are the enzymes that I was telling you about that are really impactful, very important for getting from water, fat soluble to water soluble. And so that reference is in here if you want to look at it again. But this was cool that it was known in 1997 about some of these different things. I wanted to narrow down here and just give you two examples of SNPs that can be present in the report you would get from 3x4 Nutrigenomics that do different things in the body. And so the first one is GSTM1, and this actually has the alleles are deletions or insertions. So if you get two deletions, that's really impactful. And that means that it cannot form glutathione. And glutathione is something that is incredibly valuable for the detoxification process. It's important in converting those toxins from fat to water to get them out. And so the nutrition intervention, if you do have that particular SNP, is that you need to eat more broccoli sprouts, more cauliflower, more cruciferous vegetables. These cruciferous vegetables have a certain constituent in them called sulforaphane, and sulforaphane is a bioactive that upregulates other different enzymes that help with the entire process of detoxification as well. So that would be the nutrition fix for that. The next one is actually a cytochrome P450 genetic variants. There are 19 of them that are reported on in the genetic report that we use. This one I'm going to highlight in particular. Cytochromes are responsible for metabolizing medications. There's a cytochrome P450 enzyme for every medication that you take in, anything from a statin to an ibuprofen, to some of our bigger other drugs like chemotherapies and things like that. Cytochrome P450, specifically the 3A4, is considered to be one of the largest for medications. It metabolizes and breaks down over 50% of conventional medications that are out there. And so there are certain foods that, when taken in high doses, can inhibit activity of a cytochrome P450 enzyme, and certain drugs, supplements, nutrients that can upregulate the activity. And you want to know what genetic variances that you have, so that if you have, for example, if you're eating a statin, for example, if you're taking a statin, the recommendation of a doctor, that's the cardiovascular one that helps with cholesterol, and they tell you not to eat grapefruit. And the reason for that is because grapefruit can upregulate the actually statins are metabolized by 3A4. It can upregulate that activity. So then the drug doesn't stay around in your system very long. It gets rid of it right away and doesn't do the action that it was supposed to do. So they tell you don't eat grapefruit with that. And so there's different things that will upregulate it or inhibit it in each particular situation. And knowledge of this variance really does help practitioners better predict the dose of a drug to give you. Just quick story, 20 years ago, I had to have a surgery, and I had to have Versed, which is the thing that puts you out when you have to have a surgery. And I did terrible in recovery. They thought they had given me the appropriate dose, but I spent 6-7 hours in recovery when I should have only spent one. My whole face swelled. It was kind of a disaster. I was fine, obviously, but fast forward 20 years, I now know my genetic variances. I have a genetic variance in 3A4. I had to have a surgery a couple of years ago, so I asked for a consult with the pharmacist, and I said, just to let you know, I have this genetic variance. She's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can help with that. I know to give you less of the drug. We'll take care of you. And she did. It was great. So this information is really valuable to know. So right now we'll switch topics a little bit. We did the basics. We talked about detoxification. We gave some specific examples. So now we're going to head into culinary medicine, which is a much funner topic, something that we can all do to affect change. And so the basics for culinary medicine is your protein, fat, carbs. That's something everyone knows. And that comes with vitamins and minerals. But there's also bioactives, and bioactives are things like sulforaphane in cruciferous vegetables, things like quercetin, which is in allium vegetables, things like antioxidants and polyphenols. All of those kinds of things can do that epigenetic change. They can bathe our genes in an environment that is conducive to health. So speaking about different foods that are really important for detox, proteins, absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit about how to eat proteins when it's hard to eat. Cruciferous veggies, absolutely. Going into resveratrol, going into allium and apiaceous vegetables, which would be your fennel, your garlic, your onion, lycopene from tomatoes, and omega-3 from salmon. And here is where, in these sections coming up, is where you're going to see Sam start to rapid fire some of these recipes into the chat box or the Q&A box. I can't remember which one now. But one of those. Look for your bottom of your screen to light up. And so with kiddos, sometimes protein can be hard to eat, especially something like a thick steak. And so blended meats is something that can be very advantageous to kids who are having any kind of trouble or resistance to eating certain proteins. So you can take any chicken or fish or meat and form it into chicken nuggets. You can form it into fish cakes. You can form it into hamburgers or meatloaf. And sometimes that's more desirable to a kid, that either a young kid that doesn't have all their teeth yet, or as they're older, maybe it's just difficult to chew at different times. You can put it ground into tacos and spaghetti. You can do soft shreds into things like soft shredded chicken tacos or different soups. I always get asked the question of, do you like protein powder and would you use it if a child is not eating a lot of protein. And I always say whole real food is best because you're going to get a more complete array of nutrients from your foods. But if you have to supplement with a little bit of protein powder, that's perfectly fine. The whey protein from dairy products is considered the most bioavailable to us. And so that helps us get the protein into the muscles and form new proteins a little bit easier than some of the others. A popular plant-based protein is pea protein. It does, they formulate it so that it does have all the appropriate amino acids, so it is a complete protein. However, it is not as bioavailable as the animal ones are. I do, if I have to go plant-based, prefer a hemp protein that is unsweetened and doesn't have any other junk in it, that you can just put a scoop in. They usually come 20 grams of protein to a scoop. And so you can do a half scoop if you need less or something like that. But the reason I like hemp is that it has more of the anti-inflammatory fat than say the pea protein, and it can be processed a little bit better. It is from the cannabis plant, but to be sold in the United States, hemp may not have any THC in it. And so you can be comfortable with that if it's produced in the United States. So how much do we need? A growing child, the general recommended dose of protein is 1.2 grams per kilo. And I have um, arithmetic here for you if you need that. So a small child, 40 pounds, you divide by 2.2, that gives kilograms, and say 18 kilograms is what your child weighs. And then let's just say that your child was very active and growing in a growing phase. I might bump it up to 1.4 per kilogram. So that would be 25 grams of protein in a day. You don't want to give that protein all at once. So 20 grams in a single scoop of one of the protein powders might just be too much for your particular kid. And so you might break that down into 3 equal segments through the day. So just as an idea, 30 grams of any kind of animal-based protein, it could fit in the palm of my hand or the size of a deck of cards. And so that would be chicken, steak, fish, any animal proteins. If it was a plant-based protein, you have to have a lot more volume to get the same amount of protein. And the plant-based protein may not be a complete protein. And so that's what we need for the kids. So how to eat cruciferous veggies? One of the, if you think about cruciferous, you think about broccoli, you think about kale, chard. But if you look at the bioactive constituents to it, if we really are going for sulforaphane, broccoli sprouts have the most sulforaphane by weight. And so a half a cup of broccoli sprouts has 380 milligrams of sulforaphane in it, which is incredible. If you think about a cup of broccoli, which is probably the second source of that, has about 70. And so broccoli sprouts are available in just about every grocery store these days. They come in little clamshell plastic containers, and they just grow it from broccoli seeds until it's like a half an inch high. And you can eat the whole thing, the stem and the leaf from that. They are incredibly mild tasting. And so if you have a kid that's rejecting actual broccoli, blending some of these broccoli sprouts into a smoothie or putting them on a dip or in place of like a lettuce on a sandwich or a wrap, and then adding them to avocado toast is a great way to do that. What is really important about sulforaphane is that sulforaphane is damaged by cooking. So eating them raw in the formats that I talked about is the best way to get sulforaphane if you need it. How to eat allium and apiaceous vegetables. That would be, again, your onions, your fennel, your garlic. They're loaded with antioxidants. They have soluble fiber, which is great for moving stool through the system, and they're helpful for the immune system. Some kids don't like the sharp taste, in which case cooking them will allow for a milder, less bitter flavor. And so some kids even balk at the idea of chopping them in large chop in soups and stews. So I've found that if you grate the onion into really small bits, that can really disperse it through a recipe, and it's not so offensive to a child who's not used to that taste. So salsas, and dips, raw and fresh for those kids that aren't offended by the strong taste, but worked into hamburgers, tacos, spaghettis for those that are a little resistance to that. The last item there on this particular slide is something we talk a lot about at MaxLove. We talk about going half and half. And so if your child is super used to mashed potatoes and doesn't ever eat any cruciferous vegetables, a great way is to start off like 75-25 or 50-50. So drop those potatoes into a pot to boil and then start adding some of the cauliflower in there. Cauliflower is so mild, but it's a cruciferous vegetable and loaded with nutrients. And then when it's all steamed and ready to go, you take it out and put it in the same blender. It's white as well. And so that you can start off with like 25% cauliflower, then 50% cauliflower, and then work your way up from there to start to get some of those taste buds used to some of these new foods. So omega-3s, we have a fantastic recipe for easy baked salmon, 3 different ways that Samantha is going to drop into the chat or the Q&A there. And a 3-ounce piece of salmon, or excuse me, a 4-ounce piece of salmon, which again is the size of the palm of my hand, has 1,600 milligrams of omega-3s naturally in there. And omega-3s that come from plant-based sources, I mean, from animal-based sources, are more bioavailable to the body than the ones that come from plants. And so the ones that come from plants are about 30% as absorbable. The ones that come from plants would be your flax, your almonds, your walnuts, chia, pumpkin, sunflower seeds. There are chickens that are fed flaxseed that actually lay down omega-3, high omega-3 in their eggs. So that would be another way to do it too. And that would be a way to get the animal source. The bodies will change the amount that they're eating, the animals will, into a more bioavailable omega-3 to eat. So omega-3s are important for cell membrane structure. They allow important nutrients in if that cell membrane structure is working well, and allow the trash to come out as well better. I love this chart because this chart just, it does what everybody talks about all the time, because it's like eat the rainbow, eat all the different colors. But it goes into all of the specific bioactives that are contained in each color and what they do in the body and how they can epigenetically make a difference. And then they go into all the different colors that are helpful. So even if you've got a child that really doesn't care for a wide variety of things, I know you can find a couple of things on each color of the list that'll work. So high lycopene, high potassium. We do have some people in our group that are following a low carb diet. So some of these on the upper racks may not be appropriate for your child, but unsweetened coconut water is something that I use in that particular situation. 8 ounces of unsweetened coconut water has 750 milligrams of potassium in it, which is really great if you're restricted in carbohydrates for any other reason. Making homemade ketchup is going to get you more of that lycopene from tomatoes. Spaghetti sauce is definitely going to do it. The resistant starch in potatoes, once potatoes are cooked and then they're cooled, they develop a resistant starch that doesn't raise blood sugar as much as eating them right after they come out of the oven. And it's okay to reheat without negating that process. We also have a recipe that Samantha's going to load into the chat here for us for chavocado pudding. Chavocado pudding is something that is popular by a lot of chefs, but our chefs have created a really yummy, good tested recipe for that. And that is all those avocados, which are super high in potassium as well. And then we've also got homemade electrolyte drinks. And actually, Samantha, I don't think that I gave you that one, but I can give you that one later and we can put it in the chat box later. But that's one I created that I was trying to match the Gatorade qualifications for sodium chloride and potassium. So from this point on, we've just all finished talking about, what is important to eat. But now we're going to transfer into the how we get kids to eat these different various things we're talking about. And so when we have food aversions as children, it can be a lot of different things. So we're going to talk about some of them, and then we're going to zero in on a specific one. So it could be an anatomical reason or a surgery or a radiation or a chemotherapy, a reason that a child might not want to eat because of pain or some kind of a dramatic change happening in the body. Obviously, that's going to take a little bit more work than something that is more mild, like a behavioral component. That one might need some assistance from a team member, like a speech language pathologist or some kind of therapy to help work through those. There are also sensory issues that can happen. One of the most common ones is a child feeling comfortable sitting in a chair. And so, for a lot of young children, they might be sitting in a regular chair, but their legs are suspended off the ground. And that can be a very uncomfortable feeling for a kid who has sensory issues. And so finding some kind of special chair that works to make them feel solid in the chair might be a good fix that helps a child feel more comfortable with then doing the motor skills that are necessary with a fork and spoon. So those are just some of the things to think about as we think about what's causing my child not to want to eat at this particular time. The third section over to the right, talking about motor skills. If you see that your child is struggling in motor skills in other ways, like holding a pencil or jumping rope, things like that, and not age appropriate, that can also transfer over into a reason why your child might feel uncomfortable sitting down at the table and eating. Taste or texture dysfunction, that can sometimes be the result of that middle box there on the bottom, the biochemical reasons. So, for example, if your child does have an oncology situation and they're given chemotherapy for that, the different drugs can induce nutrient depletions. So, for example, one particular type of chemotherapy does result in the depletion of zinc, and zinc is very, very important in developing appetite. And so that's something that's easy to test for that we can then replace with a supplement that can help an appetite or help the aversion to taste or smells. So that's just one example there. So we're really going to zero in on the right hand for the next couple of slides about the behavior. But if you do see any of these other things going on with your child, moms absolutely know their children best and can pick up on some things once they're made aware. But if there's vomiting, if they're complaining of abdominal pain, if there's choking and gagging or hiccuping, those are all signs that the food is not going down well. If your child drinks water and then immediately coughs, or if your child is like, I cannot eat without water, and that's too hard for me to eat, if they insist on slathering all their food with some kind of liquid or any kind of dip or drinking every second after they take a bite, those are all symptoms that they might want to get checked out by a speech language pathologist or an ENT and just make sure that the swallow is going well. So this particular lady, her name is Ellen Satter, and she has a doctorate in social work. And she wrote a book, and she is quoted all the time about the division of responsibilities in feeding your child. So this really does apply more to those kids that have behavioral issues than it does to somebody who has anatomical issues. And so her basic statement is that a parent is responsible for what, when, and where the child eats, but the child is responsible for how much and whether. And that is her statement and a lot of her research that comes into developing a good relationship with food. So she goes into that a little further in some of the books that she writes, but she says always attempt to have at least one favorite. So if your kid only eats 5 foods, they only eat peanut butter. Try to have peanut butter as one of the choices at each meal. But then we're going to talk a little bit about how to gradually introduce other foods and get kids to eat them. So if you present a meal and the child doesn't eat it, chooses not to eat it, then that, breakfast is done, lunch is done. And then you move on and you say, okay, snack is at 2 o'clock and we'll have another chance to eat then. Of course, if your child is malnutrition and losing weight, this may not be a good strategy, will not be a good strategy for you. So, but if it's just an issue of not wanting to eat, taking away some of that strife at the dinner table by following this division of responsibility is a good idea. So slowly and steadily, we want to follow four basic rules at the dinner table. We don't want to get into power struggles. We don't want to beg. We don't want to bribe. We don't want to give rewards because all of those things lead to a negative connotation with food. We want to eat at the table, definitely when we can. I understand there are some situations, ADHD or autism, where sitting at the table is just a nightmare for some kids. So it may not work. But for the most of us, we want to sit at the table. We want to set the routine and expectation and the importance of eating as a family group. And there's all kinds of studies that show that when we sit down with a family, all kinds of amazing things happen with health, with school, with social life, all of that. We have to model behaviors. I have to tell you that I'm probably the only dietitian I know that did not start off loving vegetables. And I have a genetic variance, I blame it on this, that makes vegetables taste bitter to me. So I remember when my kids were really young and I would take my obligatory 3 spears of asparagus or 3 spears of broccoli because I knew it's so incredibly valuable for health, but I was just kind of, I have to eat this, so I don't really like it. And I wasn't a good model in this particular situation for the kids. And then as I learned some of the things that I could do to make the food taste better for me, I was able to eat a lot more of them. And it really grew a lot when I had a child that was really struggling with a lot of abdominal pain and a lot of issues. And we need to really bump up her fiber and also with a particular kind of food. And so as I was working with her, I was like, I can't force her to eat these things. So I need to model it properly. And I need to use some of the things I've learned to help her see the importance of this and enjoy it while she was eating it. So mom has to do it too. Dad has to do it too, is where I'm getting at with that. Everybody has to have the same rules. And so, one thing that's really important at the dinner table, and one thing that's really important to help us develop that healthy relationship with food, is to provide an opportunity for safe discussion. With our Fierce Foods Classics, we have these little wooden paddles that have happy faces or sad faces, and we invite kids to honestly tell us how they feel about certain food. So if they don't like it, they are safe to say, I don't like it. And we try to turn it from a discussion of, I don't like it, into giving them some language to use about what they didn't care for. It's spicy, or it's strong tasting, or it's too sharp. We'll get all kinds of words like that. But just talking and inviting the kid to smell it, or what and how could we change this that makes you think you might like it a little bit better. So just opening up that area for safe discussion is really valuable. There are researchers have shown, I work with a lot of speech language pathologists, and there's fantastic evidence for showing that there's 5 different stages of acceptance. This is a picture of a guy from one of our first food classes holding up a sad face. And there was one particular food that he was voting on that he did not care for. But as you can see from his empty plates that's in it, he cleared the plate from all the other things that he was eating. So there was a lot of stuff that he liked, but he found one that he didn't care for, and he just wasn't really excited about it. And we talked about what he didn't like from that. And so whenever I am working with a kid, I often get moms that come to me and say, my kid won't eat anything. These are the 3 things that they'll eat. You run through the 5 stages of acceptance. The first thing we talk about is sight. And so using some of those vocabularies to describe food in attractive ways. You've got all kinds of, marketing going on in the grocery store that are kind of competing with you on different things. They'll call something a Ninja Turtle, or they'll call something, I know this is dating me, but Tony the Tiger for Frosted Flakes. We have to use some of these exciting language around food to help our kids like it. And we also want to create it, lay it on the table in a way that's aesthetically pleasing. So, for example, calling this, look at that deep, gorgeous red color of that strawberry. I bet that's so flavorful. Or have you ever seen blue food? Look at this kale. It's blue. We have to try that and see if the flavor is different from the green kale. Things like that. then if we have a kid that is okay to have it on the table in their sight, and we can start to develop that language around food, we can start to go into the smells of food. And so if they're not willing to put it in our mouth, another stage of acceptance is the smell. And so if I have a kid that comes to fierce food class and is like, no, I'm not going to try it, I was like, do you want to smell it? And usually their curiosity will get the better of them and they will want to smell the food. And so we are predisposed to sweet smells. So it's not, I wouldn't generally go up to a kid and say, here, smell this onion. But I have, had a kid back away and then just sort of waft the smell of an onion towards a kid. And so know that as well, and know that using those sweet smells is probably a little bit more advantageous to that. Having a kid be okay to touch a food is the third in the stage of acceptance and is also really helpful because it breaks that barrier of allowing it in their personal presence. And so you can start that conversation going there too. When you touch it, does it feel crunchy? Does it feel soft, fluffy, creamy? You can use those words with that. And then it might be before they actually will allow a taste. You say, do you want to lick it? Sometimes that can be helpful. And I also give kids permission to spit it out. I know that's not acceptable in a lot of different households, but in my household, if you are okay to get into your mouth and you really don't care for it, you can get a napkin. And then we even use that as a learning experience. Like, I wouldn't say that that's okay to do at grandma's house. I wouldn't say that that's okay to do at a host house. And then we talk discreetly about different things that you can use. You can say, no, thank you, if you don't want something on your plate. So giving the kids the autonomy and the agency to do things like that. And I love that quote at the bottom of this slide that was created by a friend of mine, a dietitian. And she said, what's better than kale is a good relationship with food. And so if your kid really doesn't like kale, it's okay. There are 6 different other cruciferous vegetables out there that are probably going to be accepted, and broccoli sprouts is probably going to be one of them. And not everybody likes kale. So having and developing that good relationship with food is more important than just specifically kale. So these are different ways that you can provide that agency idea to kids. And so short meal times are best, especially with the younger ones. And asking a kid to come in from a long day at school and immediately sitting down for a dinner is kind of tough on anybody. So allowing that opportunity to run and play beforehand is recommended. And then asking for their help in preparing and selecting the foods. So if you have the time to be able to go to the grocery store together and selecting different things, that's a great way to do it. Allowing the child to make the food with you and then serve others is also really valuable to that whole developing an ownership over what they're eating. Encouraging adventuresome and tasting games is really valuable. So if your child is advanced to the licking stage, then doing blindfolded taste tests. Chef Andrew, we're going to do some recipes here in a minute that he does different salad dressings on. So he lines up 5 different salad dressings and then makes them. That's a really fun thing to do with kids because you can get a selection of herbs and you can smell them and think about what they would taste like in a salad dressing and then make different flavors. It's like a science experiment, and then dip a carrot in each one and try that, see what you think. But we want to try to use positive language. We don't want to try to label behaviors or label a kid about where they are. If you introduce your child to the person who's going to be feeding them the next meal and you're like, my child won't eat anything, they're very picky, then a child will often live up to that behavior. But if you give your child the freedom to be adventuresome and be open to that possible new tasting experience, but then also let them say no, thank you if they don't care for anymore, that is something that is going to provide that agency as well. We did a really fun fierce food class where we did bento boxes. And so we gave each kid a bento box and then we had a selection of proteins, selection of vegetables, selection of fruits, and let the kids pick. And they just had a ball doing that. They couldn't wait to all take pictures of their selection. And they all were saying that they were going to go home and make their own lunches from now on. So that was something that made the moms happy too. So making it fun, turning it into a game, decorating the food, naming it the kid's name, Emma's special creation for the smoothie, having, say, a red day or a blue day or a green day at the grocery store, and encourage the produce manager to come in with you. Kids will even wear all red for a day at the grocery store where they're on these different foods. And some produce managers will even, like, say, cut off portions for you to go home for your taste test so you're not buying the whole thing. We often find that, if we go to the grocery store and we say, do you want to try the broccoli or do you want to try the Brussels sprouts today? Is a much better question than saying, how about some broccoli today? Because it just gives the choice and it also makes it fun and adventuresome as well. So changing the taste buds slowly is the way to go. Studies show that it takes 15 tries to go through that process of the 5 stages of acceptance. Utilizing those 50-50 hacks, or even starting off with like a 75-25 hack, using favored foods as a bridge is also a really great way. So if you are trying out a new vegetable, you can tell the child what you're up to, but say, I know you love barbecued chicken, so get a big piece of the barbecued chicken on your fork and then get a little tiny piece of the broccoli and eat the two together and tell me what you think about that. Will sometimes help that bridge. The other foods that can be used as a bridge are dips. I know with me personally, what got me more happy about eating broccoli is putting some cheese sauce on there. I mean, you can't go wrong with that type of thing. Um, the fourth thing on this list is reducing competition. So if you're serving steak and you're serving potatoes, and those are a kid's favorite things, and then you're putting a plate of broccoli on there, they're competing with the steak and the favored mashed potatoes. And the broccoli is probably going to lose in that particular situation. But if you were to introduce broccoli by itself, maybe as an after school snack with a favorite dip, we have recipes for ranch dip, and Samantha's going to post that one in the chat box there. She's also going to post our recipe for tzatziki sauce, which is can be fun for a lot of kids as well. And we have a beet hummus that is a gorgeous red color that we had almost 100% acceptance when we made the beet hummus, but a kid wouldn't touch a beet if it was roasted and plain in a lot of times. But just for portion awareness, 4 to 8 year olds need about a cup and a half. 14 to 18-year-olds need about 3 cups total a day of vegetables. These are two of our chefs here with one of our Fierce Food participants, and she's holding a copy of our Fierce Foods cookbook, and she's got a fire hot symbol in her hand. So that was a lot of fun. And it's so important to get kids straight into the kitchen and get their hands into it, because it really makes them want to eat what they actually prepared. So one of the last things here is that it has to taste good. So if you saute or roast for more flavor, if you're encourage tasting, like if you're making a soup and you take a little bit out and you put it in a bowl, say, do you like it with this when I put more salt in it, or do you like it with this when I put more basil in it? And that gets a kid in on the action too. You can add toppings like the cheese that I was talking about to the broccoli. Ground nuts and ground seeds is always a way to make something taste really good. There's actual oh, I can't remember what it is, but I think Lebanese. It's a crushed nut mixture that a lot of my friends give away at Christmas time, and it's just a topping of nuts and seeds that are crushed that you can put on different various things, and it tastes so good. Using fresh herbs not only packs the nutrients in, but also kids' little hands can tear those. So that's a great job for them to do in the kitchen. And adding those fresh herbs really bumps up the flavor in different various foods. And then, of course, serving a dip as a bridge. So here we've come to the part where we're going to run the video of Andrew on the cooking, and he's going to talk about the 5 different salad dressings I was going to show you about. And I just wanted to present this as a method to show you what our Fierce Food classes are all about, and how getting information from an actual chef and having the chef create the recipes can really give us so much information about creating these delicious foods. So we've been doing culinary medicine classes as MaxLove for over 10 years now. We started in 2013, and throughout that time, we have created over 800 recipes from a huge variety of different chefs. And 120 of them we've actually put in a cookbook. So that cookbook is available. And I think Samantha can put the link to our website where the cookbook is if you wanted to see that. But at each class we teach nutrition topics, and we kind of meld that in with culinary technique instruction as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second as I flip over to the video, and then I will share it again as soon as I've got that video going. Just one second. I'm so sorry, guys, but I started that in the wrong place. So I was supposed to start that with the introduction, and I'm not sure how it came. Sorry. Let me try that again. There we go.
Oh, mine is the sound. We can't hear anything.
I'm so sorry, guys. I am actually not sure how to make
Yeah.
that sound happen for you at this point, but I will post this video in the MaxLove because I think it's really fun. And Andrew is going into great detail about creating 5 different salad dressings, and he's talking about culinary technique. And it's not a long video. It's 7 minutes, and it will really help give you some really cool culinary tips on how to create your own, along with all of these different recipes. And so I'll go back to the slides real quick, and then we'll have our Q&A, and then I'll figure out the sound on those recipes, and we will post that video for you. I
Yeah, and I had
apologize.
to figure out the file sharing. I guess you can't file share on Zoom, or you have to have like I have to look like on the back end, I guess, to then file share. So that also didn't work, but I can follow up with everybody
Okay,
the email.
sounds good. So we have fabulous stuff for you guys, but we'll share it. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go back to playing that slideshow from current slide. Okay, so video's coming. There were from our classes Samantha and I did on nutrigenomics, we did an entire class on basics, and then we did an entire class on detoxification, one on oxidative stress, and one on methylation. And then we told them we were going to come back with a 4th lesson on culinary medicine, and this is our 4th lesson. But they asked us if we would address 3 specific questions in that as well. And so these were requested questions. And this was mom. Mom was asking me, what do you recommend in terms of raw versus fresh versus cooked? Because I'm confused in all the different things that I'm reading in the internet. And what I want to say is that there are benefits to everyone. And so if we think about raw, what are the benefits to that? Sulforaphane is one of the biggest ones that comes to mind right off the bat, because sulforaphane, it is only available in raw cruciferous veggies. And the other thing that is present in much higher amounts if it's raw is not only the antioxidants like vitamins A, C, and E, which are damaged by cooking. There are still some present in a cooked product, but not as many as in raw. But there is also higher levels of natural enzymes that come in with the food that help break the food down into its bioactive components. When we think about fresh foods, uh, if you were to have a garden and you were to go out and you were to harvest it from the garden and then come right in the house and cook it, you're absolutely going to get your most amount of nutrients from that. If you got it from the garden and you bring it in the house and you process it and it sits in the fridge for a week, you're going to probably lose some studies, and they do this with different foods, up to 50% of your vitamin and mineral components. When you freeze foods, you lose a little, but not quite as much as when it's canned. And so if you're going from great, down and down and down as more processing and more sitting around comes in. When we talk about cooked, there are certain nutrients in certain foods that are released upon cooking. And some foods are just not palatable raw. Like most people would not eat a raw potato type of thing. When tomatoes are cooked, they release lycopene. But another very important feature to being cooked is that it reduces the chance for foodborne illness. And so if you've got somebody who's immunocompromised, you definitely want to cook their food a little bit more. And another benefit is that you can create some of this resistant starch. So it happens with potatoes, but it also happens with rice. If the food is cooked and then cooled, you can have less of a blood sugar rise in foods like that, even if you reheat it. It also, specifically in vegetables, can make it have less oxalates and less phytates. Those are things that can bother the GI tract of somebody who has a sensitive issue with raw foods. So cooking can do that as well. Another question that I often get is with fermented foods, with probiotics, and the idea that we need that for a good working microbiome. And so, an easy way to get that for kids is things like kefir, things like yogurt. If a child is having problems with dairy, there's a product out there called Cocoyo that is a fermented form of coconut that can provide some of the natural probiotics in that particular food. And sometimes when a kid is new to that, it might be something that is a little bit sour for the taste. And so combining that with fruit and a little bit of vegetables like the broccoli sprouts into a smoothie might be something that would be advantageous to a child. We have great recipes for smoothies in our cookbook where they talk about the four most important parts of a smoothie. So protein parts, vegetable parts, and healthy fat parts. And then you can add in some of these fermented products in there as well. Andrew ran a great class on kombucha. We have a recipe to create your own, but you can also purchase it pre-made, obviously. And then Andrew ran a great class on pickling vegetables as well. And so that's something that you can do. And something a child might like is adding fermented veg to tacos because it adds a new flavor dimension. So encourage those bright pink onions that are pickled that take away a little bit of that bite, but still have a great taste to them. They're actually a little bit sweet. I love them, and your child might even want to try. Liver and organ meats was another question that came up, and I do definitely see the benefit of doing some of the liver and organ meats, but also with a couple of cautions. It is a superfood. It's incredibly rich in vitamin A, which is helpful for everything in the body, eyesight, liver health. It's got a ton of B vitamins. It's got heme iron, and heme iron is more absorbable than is non-heme iron. Non-heme iron is from plants, like dark green leafy vegetables and nuts and seeds have the non-heme iron. It's also got choline, zinc, copper. So it's really just an incredibly nutrient dense food. It has the most nutrient density per ounce of any other source of meat. The caution that would tell you to use with that is to be careful with sourcing. So if you can get, if you know your butcher and you know where the liver or the organ meats are coming from, it's much more advantageous than buying one from a source you don't know. How to eat, you can, if your family is game for it, cutting it in thick slices with onions and garlic, that is something that is not my favorite way to eat it, but I do like to cook the liver and put it in the freezer right away when it's done, and then grate it into a spaghetti sauce or something else that can kind of mask the taste of that. You can also put it in other ground meats. And Samantha, you had shown me one that you found where they actually put the grated liver into different various meats, correct?
Yeah, I found it was at a local Whole Foods here, and I live in Northern California. It was in the frozen section, they had like a block of ground beef, or even they had other animals like bison, even venison, and they had already grinded up the heart and the liver into the ground meat. So it tastes the same. My kids didn't ask anything, but that was helpful so that I didn't have to do that.
Process.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
was
Okay.
something to check out, I think.
Yeah.
Emerging, trying to eat organ meats again.
Yeah. And so sprouted grains was another question we had. They two reasons that you would want to do sprouted grains versus other grains is that sprouted grains have more nutrients. So they have a lot more of the minerals we're talking about, and they're easier to digest. When they sprout the grains, they soak them in water and then they drain off the soaking liquid, and that gets rid of some of the things that are out there, like lectins and phytates and things like that, that make the grains hard to digest. Ezekiel breads is one that you get a lot of sprouted grain product with. It contains a lot more fiber, like I said, as well as all these other nutrients. And so Ezekiel is considered a fairly low carbohydrate bread. One slice is 12 grams for those. You can even make them at home yourself. You can buy the seeds from a reputable service, but they are on Amazon as well. And they even have these mason jars, glass mason jars with perforated lids that you can put the seeds in with a little bit of water, and they just grow sprouts up, and you can use them in all kinds of recipes. So the sprouted popcorn is also a lower carb mixture, and making different snack mixes is also a good one for sprouted grains. Fresh herbs, that whole video that I was going to show you talked all about the benefit of fresh herbs and salad dressings. This is another thing we did in the Fierce Food classes where we talked about basil and oregano and thyme are some of the more common ones. They have culinary medicine properties to them as well, but we put them in pots and use them for a kitchen garden when we ran one of our Fierce Food classes. Like for the culinary medicine that I was talking about, parsley, mint, ginger, those can all reduce gas and reduce bloating. It actually aids digestion. If you've got a kid on chemotherapy and they've got mouth sores, chewing on basil can actually reduce some of the pain of those mouth sores. And oregano has antimicrobial properties. So this culinary medicine techniques with whole natural real food, no side effects with these particular different things, are a great way to go. And all of these different things that we already talked about will help to facilitate getting more fresh herbs into you. So just to leave you with a couple of thoughts, the fruits and veggies in the United States, 50% of children eat no vegetables a day. And the goal should be 5 to going on to 8 servings of vegetables a day if we have some kind of a health challenge where we need even more detoxifying agents in the body. And the way to get there is to start slow. Go of one, just one a day, and then gradually move those up and mix it in with other foods as a bridge. And just know that it takes time. Be patient. I know with my own kids, I had one that wanted to be a vegetarian. I had one that only wanted to eat meat and potatoes. And I thought, gosh, neither one of these guys are going to survive. And it was just try as hard as I can to introduce the foods. And fast forward to 28 years old and 26 years old are my kids, and it blows me away now what they are willing to eat and do eat and ask for recipes and things like that. So there is hope. Absolutely is hope. I had a kid, we used to teach these classes at Children's Hospital of Orange County, and I had a kid who literally would not eat more than 5 foods, and none of them were green. And fast forward 6 or 7 years worth of classes, it's not going to take that long, I promise. But she came up and tugged on my shirt one day, Miss Lexi, I just wanted to let you know that I ate broccoli and I liked it. And it was just like, woohoo, celebrate. So it was really a great thing. So it does happen. Sometimes it takes a little longer than others, but it does happen. This is the last slide that I wanted to leave you with. And this one is just packed with different recipes that we have in the cookbook. These are just pictures from our We have a wonderful food photographer who just makes that marketing angle just pop right off the page with all of these different foods. But these are all 4 different foods that we've made in our Fierce Food classes. And I gave, ideas for breakfast, ideas for lunch, ideas for dinner. We'll print these in the actual, um, when Samantha posts the recipes for that, will go along with the slides. So you'll be able to see all of those as well. And so that is the end of the presentation today. And I'm so glad you guys were able to work your way through it with me and Samantha. And we were excited to share this information with you guys. And I would love any questions that you have at this point.
Yeah, anybody, if you have questions, feel free to send them through. But one question I have off the bat, Lexi, is how do you think this kind of approach or even this kind of testing, this kind of knowledge, how do you think it could, or how do you see it impacting a child's, treatment or anything else they could be going through?
Well, for example, if we delve into the world of oncology, in oncology world, there's all these different medications that are given to a child, and I'm just going to pick apart one particular medication. It's called methotrexate. And the whole important part of what methotrexate does in the body is it shuts down the development of new cells, and that's how it combats the oncology process. But the thing that it does is it shuts down folate completely. And so at the end of the treatment period, they're given a rescue dose of folate. But if they're going through the process and they have cytochrome P450 enzyme variances or they have other folate variances, it could be even doing more damage. And so in some oncology centers, they give the rescue dose of folate in throughout the period. So knowing this about your child would be incredibly helpful in an oncology situation. If you've got, say, a child with heart issues, the child with heart issues, there are several different genetic variances that are reported on that talk about how your child processes not only fatty acids in general, like saturated fatty acids versus polyunsaturated fatty acids, but also talks about how your child processes the correct anti-inflammatory type of fats, so omega-3s and omega-6s. And so knowing that information directs diet choices, even with more precision than not knowing it. Say, for example, if your child doesn't have any of these health issues, but has, say, a huge history of bone issues in their family, then maybe your child has chosen not to eat dairy. But that gives even more importance to the idea that I need to get both calcium and I need to get collagen type products. And I need to place more emphasis on them than somebody else who doesn't have these bone issues. So those are just 3 examples of how personalizing and knowing some of this nutrigenomic information can really help individually support optimal health in your child.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think one thing that comes to me too is I know when families are given a diagnosis like cancer for their child, there can be a lot of frantic energy to add in all these things to your child's, especially supplements. And is this kind of knowledge able to help you decipher what some of those supplements should be or what they should not
Absolutely.
take? Yeah.
Such a fabulous question because, for example, if you know that your drug that you're being given is metabolized by a cytochrome P450 enzyme, and you are being told by, say, a holistic healthcare provider that you should take curcumin for anti-inflammatory properties, but knowing that you've got this cytochrome P450 issue and knowing that curcumin makes it worse, then it would help you tailor which supplements would be appropriate for you and which ones wouldn't. For example, there is another, I know I'm going back to oncology a lot. I know that there's other people here with us that have different other issues as well, but there's a genetic variance called AKT1 that has to do with how your body processes THC. So a lot of kids are being told, their families are being told that it might be helpful to do that. But with that particular one, there's 6 times the psychosis potential for taking THC of certain kinds with these different medications. And so that could help tailor suggestions for treatment as well.
Yeah, that's super helpful and
Yeah.
very valuable information. We do have one question from Mandy. Is how do you order the Nutrigenomics test, and do you know if insurance helps cover that cost?
That's a great question, Mandy. I'm happy to report that some centers in the United States do cover both the doctor you're working with and the insurance do cover genetics counseling, in which case you would get all of it. This particular one that we use with our company with MaxLove Project is 3x4 Nutrigenomics. It is not covered by insurance. The cost right now out of pocket for the person is $299, and that is not covered by insurance. There are, like I said, about 20 other different nutrigenomics reporting companies out there, and their prices vary anywhere from, I've seen it as low as like 179, I've seen it as high as 450. I have looked at a lot of them, and I really like the research that 3x4 does. They provide references on any nutrition recommendation they make based on specific polygenic risk scores. And they even give you the reference thing that you can go and track down the study and read it for yourself. So I really like theirs. And I really like how they produce their report and the use of color and the ease of explanation that it offers. So I like 3x4, but it's not the only one ever. And there are other ones. There are even, for example, there's one called pharmacogenetics that only looks at CYP enzymes. So they'll print out a report of just CYP enzymes, just those 19 ones. And they'll even explain what your genetic variances are and then what drugs each one metabolizes and what foods or what supplements inhibit or encourage the activity of the particular enzyme. So that's, really helpful information as well. I like 3x4 because it gives a huge picture along with all of those CYP enzymes, but it's a good one.
Yeah, and Mandy too, something that we're doing in MaxLove is kind of providing this resource to families. So if this is something your friend would be interested for their daughter, we could send you an info form and you can fill that out, and then in that case, MaxLove would provide it for that family. I know me personally, I used a flex spending account. I don't know if that's accessible to anybody, but I used it that way. And then something to note too, and Lexi, you could add on to this, is like, because I got the report for myself, and reading it by myself is very different than having someone like Lexi read it to you. So that's kind of just another layer of what MaxLove can provide right on top of the report. It's being able to read that information in an applicable way, which is something that we're looking to provide at MaxLove too, is that we can read the child's response or answers and have it into more actionable steps. Because Lexi does look into, the fact that it's a child, diagnosis, medications, and things that they're on. So there's that added layer as well. So I can send that to you, Mandy, after, if that'd be of interest to your friend's family.
So we have a question from Amber. My kid loves mac and cheese, but is transitioning to a keto diet. I tried a variation with cauliflower instead of pasta, and it was not a hit. I understand that, Amber. In your child's case, it might be good to transition slowly, number one. And so have some of the pasta in there and then have some of the cauliflower in there as well. We have a fabulous recipe that our chefs created of the cauliflower mac and cheese, and they do some really specific things about toasting some of the low carb bread to go on the top as a coating, so that could be used as a bridge. But then there is also, going slowly through that process, but it's also an opportunity for a great discussion. So if your child has the language, or if you can give them the language, what didn't you like about it? Is it just that it's different from your usual? It might be that the usual is super creamy and you really liked that texture, but the cauliflower one was more gritty, or whatever word they want to come up using. And then you can talk about, well, how can we make it that way? How can we make it something that works for you? And then you can say, make it into a game, and you can cook cauliflower 5 different ways. And you can say, okay, this one's really cooked and it's a lot creamier than this one over here that has a little bit of a bite to it. So you can start to organize some language about what they liked and didn't like with it. And just to give you a little bit background too, when I first started with my daughter and she needed to incorporate all these new and different foods that we weren't already doing, one of them was fruits and vegetables, and she just was not a fan. I think she inherited my, how the fruits and veggies just tasted too strong. And so we incorporated them in several different ways, and she helped me process them and get them into the freezer. So we did things like we put garbanzo beans into cookies. We did things where we put spinach into blueberry jam and made granola bars that had protein in them. And so she was part of the work to put them into a texture preference and a flavor preference that worked for her. And it was that idea of, we used the term when she was really young, and you're putting all these super ninja fighters into your veins when you're eating this particular food. What is a way that we can help you eat it that you will enjoy eating it, but you'll still get all the benefit from it? And so having the conversation with your kid, having the buy-in with your kid, and then giving your kid the language and the adventuresome taste test to get it to the place where you want it. But I would say with your mac and cheese is starting off, with some noodles and with some cauliflower. And I'll post that recipe for you as well with that. And I see that, Samantha, you answered that question too. Oh, thanks. You're welcome, Amber. I'm glad that was helpful. So good. And we would love to hear any questions you have. So any questions at all about the initial nutrigenomics part, about detoxification. And we'd also, Sam and I, love to hear from you about what you guys want to hear. So if there's something that you would like us to do another lesson on in the future that you'd like to get information on, we'd love to hear that too. So you can submit that here in the chat, or you can submit it on the app too, to either one of us, and we'll hope to include it.
Yeah, and I'm going to put our emails in the chat too, if that's helpful, to send any of that info.
Yeah.
But thank you everyone for joining, and we hope this was helpful, and we really look forward to being able to present more of this sort of information in the future.
Thanks so much, everybody.
I'm going to stop the recording.